My name is Rachel Palmer. I'm 37 years old, and just last week, I stood under the dazzling lights of the Mayfair Grand Ballroom, waiting for my name to be called. It was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life, a celebration of everything I had clawed my way toward with blood, sweat, and a whole lot of quiet tears no one ever saw. A professional gala, black tie, full of powerful people sipping champagne and pretending their worlds were perfect. I had spent weeks preparing for that night, carefully choosing my dress, perfecting my acceptance speech, trying to believe I truly deserved the honor I was about to receive for my work in environmental chemistry and education. It wasn't just a night of recognition. It was a culmination of a life built from scratch, from ashes, and yet, as I stood there on the marble floor, my heart racing under the surface of my steady smile, I could feel the old weight creeping back in. That gnawing feeling that no matter how far you run, no matter how many mountains you climb, some ghosts always find a way to follow you. The hum of conversation and clinking glasses started to close in around me. And I realized I needed a moment, just a minute to breathe, to find myself again before walking onto that stage. I slipped through the side hallway toward the restroom, hoping for a few minutes of solitude. And that's when it happened. As I pushed open the bathroom door and stepped inside, the soft click of my heels echoing off the tiles, I froze. There, standing at the sink, perfectly poised in a glittering silver gown, was my mother. Her back was to me at first. Her head tilted slightly as she reapplied her lipstick with the kind of precision that suggested this was just another evening of cocktails and charity auctions. But then, her eyes flicked up to the mirror, and landed directly on mine. Her hand froze mid-motion. For a heartbeat, we both just stood there, the room too small for the tidal wave crashing between us. "Rachel," she said finally, her voice so cool, so detached it might as well have been ice. Like we had just bumped into each other at the country club after a Sunday brunch. "Instead of here, after 15 years of silence. I didn't expect to see you here," she added, turning slightly, her posture as rigid and elegant as ever. I gripped the edge of my clutch. Grounding myself, I forced my voice steady, matching her indifference even as my pulse thundered in my ears. "I could say the same," I replied. "What brings you here?" She turned back to the mirror, dabbing at the corner of her mouth with a tissue. "Your father and I were invited, of course," she said smoothly. "We've always been involved with organizations that support education." "And you?" The question was casual, almost dismissive, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "I'm being honored tonight," I said, locking my gaze on her reflection. "For my work in research and education." For the briefest moment, I saw it, the flicker of surprise. So quick it was almost invisible before she buried it under layers of practiced indifference. "I see," she said simply, turning her attention back to her perfect reflection. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words landed like a slap, sharper than any insult she could have crafted. They dragged me straight back to that night 15 years ago. The night I walked out of that house with nothing but a duffel bag and a cracked heart. I remembered the heavy silence that filled the living room as my father paced, his voice like a hammer breaking me down piece by piece. "This family has standards," he had barked, his face twisted with anger. "And you've done nothing but drag us down." I remembered clutching my acceptance letter from the community college, the ink already smudged from the sweaty grip of my hand. Knowing it wasn't enough for them. Knowing I wasn't enough. And my mother, my beautiful, cold mother, sitting there on the pristine white couch, scrolling through her phone like none of it mattered. Like I didn't matter. That night, they didn't even come to the door when I left. They just let me walk out into the darkness. Into a future I had no map for. I snapped back to the present. To the glittering bathroom and the woman who had once been the center of my world but now felt like a stranger wearing my mother's face. "You look well," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "Thanks," I said. "I built a life. Turns out you don't need approval to survive." For a second, her lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown, Just the smallest crack in her polished mask. And then, just like that, she was gone. She capped her lipstick, smoothed her gown, and walked out of the bathroom without another word, leaving me standing there alone. I stared at the door swinging shut behind her, the cold air from the hallway brushing against my skin, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. There it was, 15 years of silence, broken by a chance encounter and a handful of words that barely scratched the surface of everything we had buried between us. As I washed my hands under the cold water, I stared at my own reflection, searching for the girl they had thrown away all those years ago. She wasn't there. In her place stood a woman they couldn't control anymore. A woman who had fought, clawed, and rebuilt her own life from the ruins they left behind. The twist was, they had come tonight expecting to bask in the glow of their social standing. To network, to be seen supporting education. They hadn't realized they'd be standing in the audience, watching their invisible daughter be honored on that very stage. And something deep inside me knew, this night wasn't just about the award. It was about being seen. Finally, fully, on my own terms. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel invisible anymore. Walking back into the ballroom after that encounter with my mother felt like stepping onto another planet. The chandeliers glittered, the orchestra played a soft waltz, and guests milled about sipping champagne and laughing like nothing could ever touch them. It was almost enough to make me forget how the ground had just shifted under my feet. Almost. I made my way to a quiet corner near the towering Christmas tree, letting the glow of the lights soften the edges of my anger. It was safer there, half in the shadows, half in the warmth. I sipped my water and tried to settle the swirling mess inside me. But standing there, among the clink of glasses and the hum of conversation, the memories clawed their way back whether I wanted them to or not. I was 19 again, standing in the living room of my childhood home, clutching my acceptance letter to community college like it was some kind of shield. My father paced the length of the room, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "This family has standards," he spat, waving a hand like the letter was something dirty. "Community college? You should be ashamed to even show your face here." My mother sat perched on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, scrolling through her phone without so much as glancing at me. Her silence was worse than anything my father could have shouted. "You want to waste your life?" he continued, his voice rising. "Fine, but you'll do it without dragging the Palmer name through the mud." I stood there, mute, the words catching in my throat. I wanted to scream that I was trying, that I needed their help, that I was drowning and all they could see was how it reflected on them. But I knew better. In our house, vulnerability wasn't just frowned upon. It was a weakness to be punished. So when he told me to leave, I didn't argue. I went upstairs, packed everything I could fit into an old duffel bag, and walked out into the cold night without looking back. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would stop me. But they didn't. Not my father, who had retreated to his study. Not my mother, who kept scrolling as if my very existence was just a mild inconvenience. For weeks, I crashed on a friend's pull-out couch, my pride too raw to let me ask for anything more. I scraped together enough money from my part-time job at a diner to pay for a tiny studio apartment, a converted attic space that smelled like old wood and dust but felt like freedom. Community college wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I had dreamed of when I was a little girl sitting in the backseat of my parents' Lexus, listening to them boast about my potential. But it was mine. Every late-night shift wiping down greasy tables, every hour spent hunched over textbooks under flickering fluorescent lights, every B+ that felt like a victory after years of being told I wasn't good enough. I wasn't doing it for them anymore. I was doing it for the girl they had left behind. The twist came the day I got back my first chemistry exam. I had spent weeks studying, poring over formulas and reaction mechanisms until my eyes blurred. When the professor handed me my paper, I couldn't bring myself to look at it right away. I tucked it into my bag, heart pounding. Later, sitting alone in the library, I pulled it out, 92%. I stared at the number like it might disappear if I blinked. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself smile, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. That tiny victory lit something inside me, a spark that no amount of disappointment or cruelty could extinguish. I switched my major to chemistry that same week, not because I wanted to prove something to my parents, but because I genuinely loved it. Every element, every reaction, it all made sense in a way that my world never had. The next 2 years were a grind. Work, study, sleep, repeat. There were nights I cried myself to sleep from sheer exhaustion. Days when the loneliness gnawed at me until I thought it might hollow me out completely. But there were also moments of pure, stubborn joy. A professor pulling me aside to say I had potential. A classmate high-fiving me after nailing a brutal exam. A future that, for the first time, wasn't a punishment but a possibility. When I walked across the stage to receive my associate's degree, there was no family in the crowd cheering for me. Just Aunt Lydia, my mother's estranged sister, waving a ridiculous bouquet of sunflowers from the very back row. "You did it, kid," she said afterward, pulling me into a hug so fierce it made my ribs ache. "You did it all by yourself." And for once, I believed her. The next twist came sooner than I expected. One of my chemistry professors, Dr. Collins, pulled me aside after the ceremony. His lined face serious. "You have something rare," he said, handing me a business card with trembling fingers. "Passion, grit. Most kids these days don't have half your fight." I didn't know what to say. Compliments still felt foreign, like ill-fitting clothes. "There's a program," he continued, lowering his voice like it was a secret. "Oxford University, Environmental Chemistry Research. It's competitive, but I think you should apply." Oxford. The word didn't even sound real. It might as well have been a different planet. I laughed, shaking my head. "There's no way. You'll never know if you don't try," he said simply. And for the first time in a very long time, I let myself wonder, what if I did try? What if I stopped letting the voices in my head, the ones my parents planted there, tell me what I couldn't be? I tucked the card into my wallet that night, the weight of it burning against my skin like a promise. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the hurt and fear, hope began to flicker to life once again. I didn't know it yet, but my journey was only just beginning. The idea of applying to Oxford seemed so absurd at first that I almost didn't do it. I tucked Dr. Collins's business card into my wallet, and for days, I let it sit there like a dare I was too scared to accept. But every time I pulled it out, every time I ran my thumb over the raised gold letters, something inside me whispered, "Why not?" It took weeks to gather the courage. Crafting the personal statement alone felt like walking barefoot over glass, dredging up every piece of my story I had tried to bury, the rejection, the loneliness, the nights spent studying until my eyes burned. But when I finally hit submit, I closed my laptop with a shaky breath and promised myself one thing, no matter what happened. At least I tried. I didn't tell anyone, not Aunt Lydia, not my friends at the diner. No one. I couldn't bear the thought of explaining if I failed. Weeks passed, then a month. I told myself not to hope too hard. And then, one gray, rainy Thursday, an email popped up on my cracked old laptop. "We are pleased to inform you." I stared at the screen, the words swimming in front of my eyes. My hands shook as I read and reread the offer letter. A full research grant, environmental chemistry, Oxford University. For a moment, all I could do was sit there, blinking through the tears, my body too stunned to move. Oxford, me. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a backpack. I didn't call my parents. Didn't even consider it. I only called Aunt Lydia the night before my flight. "You're going to change the world, kid," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "Do it for you, no one else." And I did. Oxford wasn't easy. It wasn't the romanticized version I had built up in my head. It was cold, unfamiliar, and so brutally lonely that some nights I curled up on my narrow dorm bed and wondered what the hell I had done. The accent barriers, the culture shock, the overwhelming sense that I didn't belong, they all crashed over me in relentless waves. The other students were polished, confident, the products of private schools and old money. They spoke in references I didn't understand, laughed about vacations in places I'd never heard of. I was the outsider, the girl from nowhere, trying to build something from nothing. But every time I wanted to give up, I thought about the night I walked out of my parents' house. I thought about the girl with the duffel bag and nowhere to go. And I refused to quit on her. I threw myself into my research, pouring every ounce of myself into late nights at the lab, endless lectures, experiments that failed more often than they succeeded. The first major twist came during my second year. I was presenting at a small conference, nothing fancy. Just a few dozen people in a cramped lecture hall, but it felt monumental to me. I stood there, heart pounding, my palms slick with sweat, explaining my findings on soil remediation. Halfway through my presentation, I caught sight of a man standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching me intently. Afterward, while everyone was packing up, he approached. "Rachel Palmer?" he asked, extending his hand. I nodded, wiping my sweaty palm against my skirt before shaking his hand. "My name's Dr. Hadley. I run a research division at Cambridge. Impressive work today, very impressive." I blinked at him, stunned. "If you're interested," he continued, handing me a business card. "We're always looking for bright minds." Cambridge. The word hit me like a punch. Oxford had always felt like the impossible dream. But Cambridge? It was the stuff of myth. Still, it wasn't a job offer. Just a possibility. A door cracked open an inch. And I knew better than anyone that sometimes an inch was all you needed. I kept working, harder than ever. I completed my master's degree with distinction. Then, fueled by that tiny glimmer of hope, I dove headfirst into a PhD program. It nearly broke me. There were nights I fell asleep on lab benches. Mornings when I couldn't remember the last time I ate something that wasn't instant noodles. Imposter syndrome gnawed at me constantly, whispering that sooner or later they would figure out I didn't belong here. But every time doubt crept in, I thought about my father's voice ringing in my ears. "You've done nothing but drag us down." And I pushed harder. 3 years later, I defended my dissertation. The final twist came the day I received the offer letter from Cambridge. Not an internship, not a temporary placement, a full faculty position. Professor Rachel Palmer. I printed out the offer letter and sat staring at it for nearly an hour, the weight of it pressing against my chest. All the nights I cried myself to sleep in that dusty attic studio. All the greasy diner shifts. All the cold silences and closed doors. None of it could touch me here. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't a disgrace. I was enough. More than enough. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing after their approval anymore. I had built something that no one could take from me. Not even them. As I packed up my tiny Oxford apartment, ready to move into my new place in Cambridge, I found the old business card Dr. Collins had given me years ago. The edges were frayed, the gold lettering faded. I smiled, tracing the letters with my thumb. He had seen something in me long before I ever saw it in myself. Maybe that was all it took sometimes, one person believing in you just enough to help you believe too. I tucked the card into a small wooden box where I kept my most precious things, a photo of Aunt Lydia, my first 92% chemistry exam, and now, my offer letter from Cambridge. My life wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was mine, and I had fought like hell to claim it. The ballroom shimmered like a dream, but all I could feel was the steady pounding of my heart against my ribs. I adjusted the thin strap of my dress, trying to steady myself, trying to look like I belonged. The stage was set. The host's voice echoed through the grand hall. A low, polished murmur that barely rose above the clinking glasses and murmured conversations. I could see them across the room, my parents. My mother, poised and polished, her face a mask of detached grace. My father, standing stiffly beside her, arms crossed, scanning the crowd like he was looking for someone more important to talk to. They didn't know yet. They didn't know that I was the one being honored tonight. Some twisted part of me wished I could freeze time. Let them stay in that blissful ignorance just a little longer. Because once the announcement came, once the curtain lifted, they couldn't unsee it. I shifted on my heels, trying to drown out the whispers, the hum of money and privilege all around me. This night was supposed to be mine, my triumph, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reckoning. The host tapped the microphone, and the room quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice warm and practiced. Tonight, we gather not only to celebrate achievement in education and sustainable chemistry, but to honor someone whose journey embodies resilience, brilliance, and an unwavering commitment to making a difference. I took a breath, the air thin in my lungs. In addition, he continued, smiling, we are thrilled to announce a special grant, $2 million, donated anonymously to further the recipient's research and impact. A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Heads turned, eyebrows raised. $2 million was not a casual sum. I barely registered it. I was too busy watching my father's face. At first, there was only mild curiosity, then a flicker of suspicion. And then, when the host said the words, Rachel Palmer, the change was instantaneous. His body stiffened, his jaw tightened so hard I thought he might shatter his teeth. Across the room, my mother's wine glass tilted slightly in her hand before she caught herself. I walked toward the stage, my feet strangely steady, as if some invisible hand was guiding me. Applause swelled around me, polite, practiced, almost mechanical. I reached the podium and smiled. Though it felt brittle, I thanked the foundation, my colleagues, the mentors who had believed in me when no one else had. I kept my words brief, simple, refusing to let emotion crack through my armor. When I stepped down, blinking under the bright lights, I thought the worst was over. But then the host's voice rang out again, almost as an afterthought. And we would also like to acknowledge the generous sponsor behind tonight's grant, Mosaic Fertilizers. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Mosaic Fertilizers, my father's company. My stomach twisted violently. The $2 million? The money funding my next chapter? It came from him. From the man who threw me away without a second thought. The room blurred at the edges as realization crashed over me. My success, my moment, was entangled with him, whether I liked it or not. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it, my father, pushing back from the wall, his face thunderous, moving swiftly toward the exit. Running. He couldn't stay. He couldn't stand the thought that the girl he discarded was the same one being honored with his company's money. For one blinding second, I almost let him go. Almost. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't 19 anymore. I wasn't the scared kid packing a duffel bag under the hollow gaze of a mother who didn't even say goodbye. I was a woman who had clawed her way to this moment. And I wasn't going to let him run from it. Without thinking, I left my table and slipped through the crowd, weaving past startled guests. My heels clicked sharply against the marble as I pushed through the heavy double doors and out into the cool night air. There he was, standing by his car, fumbling with the keys, cursing under his breath. "Dad," I called out, my voice slicing through the stillness. He froze but didn't turn around. "Dad," I said again, louder this time, forcing him to face me. Slowly, he turned. The parking lot lights cast long, harsh shadows across his face. "What do you want, Rachel?" he snapped, his voice low and vicious. "Another handout?" The words should have hurt. Maybe once they would have. But now, they just sounded pathetic. "I didn't know," I said, walking closer. "I didn't know it was your company that donated the money." His laugh was hollow, sharp. "Doesn't matter," he said. "You took it, didn't you? You'll take whatever scraps you can get. Just like you always have." I shook my head. a strange calm settling over me. I didn't take anything from you, I said evenly. I earned that award. I earned every step that got me here. He sneered, the old bitterness curdling his features. You're nothing but a charity case. He spat. Always have been. Always will be. There it was. The raw truth. He wasn't angry because I had failed. He was angry because I had succeeded. Without him. Despite him. I took another step forward. Close enough now that I could see the tight lines etched deep into his face. I don't want your money, I said quietly. I don't want anything from you. And I never did. For a heartbeat. He said nothing, just stared at me, breathing hard, like he wanted to lash out but didn't have the words. Then he turned, yanked open his car door, and slid behind the wheel without another word. The engine roared to life, headlights flaring, and just like that, he was gone, tearing out of the parking lot like the devil himself was chasing him. I stood there for a long moment, the night air sharp and cold against my skin. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. I didn't need him to stay. I didn't need his love. I didn't need anything he refused to give. Because I had already built a life he couldn't touch. And tomorrow, I would decide what to do with the money tied to his name. But tonight, I let the weight of it all slip from my shoulders. Tonight, I stood free. The next morning, the sunlight spilled across my apartment in wide golden stripes. But it didn't chase away the heaviness pressing against my chest. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the award plaque they'd given me last night, the one with my name etched in careful gold letters. I should have felt proud, triumphant, victorious. Instead, all I felt was tired. The $2 million grant wasn't just a gift. It was a question hanging over my head like a storm cloud. Could I really accept it? Knowing where it came from. Knowing the source was the very man who had once told me I was an embarrassment to his name. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into my fingers, trying to quiet the war raging inside me. There was no rule saying I had to keep the money. There was no rule saying I couldn't find a way to turn it into something better. I had choices now, real choices. That thought alone was enough to make my heart ache. Because back then, when I was 19, standing in the cold night outside their house, I hadn't had a single one. The twist came late that afternoon. I was still sitting at the table, turning everything over in my mind, when my phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Lydia. Proud of you, kid, always was, no matter what you decide. It's yours now, not his. Remember that. I read it once, twice, the words sinking deep into the places that still hurt. It's yours now, not his. Maybe that was the truth I needed. The money wasn't a chain. It wasn't a weight dragging me back to who I used to be. It could be a tool, a weapon for good. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I had to do. I grabbed my laptop and started drafting emails, my hands moving faster than my brain. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making a statement to him, or to anyone else. It was about finally breaking free. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, a wild, almost giddy energy rushing through me. I wasn't just walking away from my past. I was rewriting it. 2 weeks later, the headlines started popping up. Rachel Palmer establishes $2 million scholarship fund for underprivileged students in STEM. Local professor turns gala grant into opportunity for the next generation. Breaking barriers, from rejection to revolutionizing access to education. I watched from the sidelines as the news spread. My inbox flooded with thank you notes from students I'd never met. Parents, teachers, strangers who saw a glimpse of themselves in my story. And somewhere across town, I knew my father was seeing it too. Not just my face splashed across the headlines, but my choice, my refusal to let his money define me. I hadn't taken his charity. I had turned it into something he couldn't control, couldn't twist into a narrative that made him the hero. And that, more than anything, was my real victory. The twist I didn't expect came a few nights later. I was walking home from the university, the late fall chill cutting through my jacket. when I noticed a figure sitting on the front steps of my apartment building. At first, I thought maybe it was just a neighbor. But as I got closer, I recognized him, my father. For a second, I stopped breathing. He looked smaller somehow. Deflated. The crispness he always carried like armor was gone, replaced by a man who looked out of place in his own skin. He stood up slowly as I approached, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough. I didn't answer. I didn't know if I could. "I heard what you did," he continued, glancing down at the sidewalk. "With the money." I stayed silent, waiting. He shifted uncomfortably. He swallowed hard, struggling with the words. "I didn't know. Back then, I didn't see who you really were." I stared at him, the anger rising like a tide, but something else too. Pity, maybe, sadness. "You didn't want to see," I said quietly. He flinched, just barely. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry." The words hung between us, brittle and strange. I waited for them to land, for them to feel like enough. They didn't, but for the first time, I realized they didn't have to. I wasn't standing here for his apology. I wasn't waiting for his approval. I had already won the only battle that mattered, the one inside myself. I nodded once, a small, steady motion. "Thank you," I said, meaning it, not because it fixed anything, but because it allowed me to close the door on a chapter that had haunted me long enough. He looked like he wanted to say more, but I didn't wait. I stepped past him, my keys clinking softly as I unlocked the door. Inside, my apartment was warm and bright, filled with the quiet chaos of a life I had built with my own two hands. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting out a long, shaky breath. Maybe he would change, maybe he wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't that broken girl desperate for love she'd never get. I was Rachel Palmer, researcher, educator, fighter, and I was finally, fully free. The past was a place I had walked through, but it was not where I lived. My future was something I could finally claim, without apology, without fear. And God, it felt good to finally be home in my own life.